Welcome to Restoria. I'm Edward, and this is your quiet place for gentle bedtime stories. Get comfortable, take a breath, and let the story ease you into sleep. The Night Bus to Aldermoor. Arthur knew the route the way he knew his own hands. Without looking, without thinking, every bend in the road came to him before the headlights found it. Every roundabout announced itself through some private sense he had spent 11 years developing without ever trying to. The road was simply part of him now, a known thing, the way a particular chair is known after years of sitting, the way a path through a garden is known in the dark. He had been driving bus 42 for 11 years. The route ran from the depot on Crane Street out through the edge of town, past the retail park, through the villages of Mossfield and Pelton and Little Hayne, all the way to the turning circle at Aldermoor and back again. 6 stops outbound, 6 on the return, 41 minutes each way, 5 runs a night, the last one pulling back into the depot a little before 4 in the morning. On the timetable, it looked purposeful, practical, a route that connected things. The truth was simpler than that. Nobody took it. Not anymore. There had been passengers once, a handful of nurses finishing late shifts at the cottage hospital in Pelton, a man named Gerald who worked at a bakery and needed to reach his ovens by 2 in the morning, crossing the town on feet that were always a little sore from the previous day. A woman with a large tartan trolley bag who got on at Little Hayne every Friday and got off again at Mossfield, always without any explanation, always with the particular self-contained air of someone who had decided that their reasons belonged to them. Arthur had never asked. It was not his place to ask. His job was the driving, and the driving was enough. But the hospital had closed its night ward 3 years ago in the spring. Gerald had retired. The woman with the tartan bag had simply stopped appearing, the way passengers did, without ceremony, without notice. One Friday just not there, and then the next Friday not there either, and then all the Fridays after. And the route had emptied. The council had kept it running. Arthur had never been told the precise reason, and he had found himself not wanting to ask in case the asking somehow prompted a review. Perhaps there was paperwork that made cancellation complicated. Perhaps someone in an office somewhere held a genuine belief that the route would fill again in time. Perhaps it was simply inertia, the comfortable resistance of a system to its own change. Whatever the reason, Bus 42 still pulled out of Crane Street Depot at 9:47 every evening, and Arthur drove it through the dark, and the seats stayed empty, and the stops came and went. He had grown comfortable with it. More than comfortable. He had grown to love it, if love was not too large a word for the feeling. The solitude was not a weight. The empty bus was warm and amber-lit and quiet, and the road was entirely his, and the villages slept at their own pace. And there was something in the rhythm of it all that felt less like work and more like a kind of tending, as if his driving the route kept it alive, as if the road needed the bus the way a fire needs a steady hand to keep it from going out. He had told his wife this once, sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning with instant coffee and the smell of toast still in the air. She had looked at him with a particular expression, the one that combined warmth with gentle exasperation in equal measure, and said, "Arthur, you are a very strange man." He had agreed. They had both laughed. It was one of those small, ordinary moments he returned to, often without any particular reason, only because it had been good. Bus 42 smelled of vinyl, and the faint, sweet chemical edge of the cleaning fluid the depot used on the floor panels every afternoon. The overhead lights were amber rather than white, which Arthur had always preferred. White lights made you feel watched. Amber lights felt like evening, like a room with a lamp, like something that permitted slowness. He pulled out of the depot at 9:47 exactly. The town was quiet at this hour, in the way that towns go quiet when the restaurants have mostly emptied but the pubs have not yet closed, a particular in-between quiet that had its own texture. Shops locked and dark, a kebab place on Market Street still lit with its yellow window, a couple walking a dog along the canal path without any hurry at all. The bus slid past all of it without stopping. His first stop was the retail park, 2 miles out on the old bypass road, where the big commercial sheds sat dark and sealed for the night, and the car park was empty except for a single lorry sitting with its cab light on. Waiting for the morning delivery bays to open, he pulled in at the stop, opened the doors out of habit, the habit being so well formed by now that his hand moved to the button before he had consciously decided. The cool night air came in for a moment, carrying the smell of tarmac and something green from the fields beyond the retail park. He waited the regulation 20 seconds, closed the doors, pulled away. This was how it always went. The stops were gestures now, courtesies to the idea that someone might be waiting. He performed each one with the same care he would have given them if the bus had been full. That mattered to him in a way he found difficult to articulate. The route deserved to be driven properly. The stops deserved to be kept. The road narrowed considerably after the retail park, dropping down between tall hedgerows that crowded close to both verges. Arthur clicked the main beams on. The hedges were dense and high, and in the headlight wash they had a particular silver-green quality that he associated entirely with this stretch of road at this hour. Nothing else in his life had that color. He had tried to describe it to his wife once, sitting in the garden on an evening in early summer, and had given up. Some things only existed fully in the experiencing of them, and lost something essential when you tried to carry them away in words. The hum of the engine was steady and low. He had come to know the particular note it held on this stretch, slightly lower than on the wider roads, something to do with the enclosed space of the lane and the way it bounced the sound back. It was the sound of the bus being itself, unhurried, occupying the road completely. Mossfield came up on the left. A village green with a bench that nobody sat on at this hour. A pub with a few cars still in the car park. A row of stone cottages set slightly back from the road with their bedroom windows dark. The stop was outside the post office, a small shelter with a perspex panel missing on the windward side. Arthur pulled in, opened the doors, breathed in the night air again. There was the smell of wood smoke from somewhere, a chimney still burning late. He waited the 20 seconds, closed the doors, moved on. The dip under the railway bridge was one of his favorite moments on the route. The road dropped and then rose again, and the bridge was low and old and built from stone that had darkened over many decades, and for a brief moment the bus was enclosed by it, the acoustics shifting, the engine note changing slightly. The whole world briefly compressed and then released. On the other side of the bridge, the fields opened again and the sky came back, and Arthur always breathed a little differently in those first seconds after, as if the bridge were a kind of threshold. He had no rational explanation for this feeling and had stopped trying to find one. Past the bridge, the road wound through a stretch of older countryside, less tended than the land around the village. Field boundaries that had not changed in a long time. A stand of ash trees off to the left that Arthur had watched through the seasons, often enough to know them at any time of year. In winter, bare. In spring, the last trees to come into leaf. In summer, dense and self-contained. In autumn, the yellow that ash trees turned, which was not quite like any other yellow. The lane into Little Hayne was narrower still. The hedges on both sides pressed close enough that the wing mirrors caught the growth at the edges, a soft, persistent shushing sound all the way along. On his first week driving this route, that sound had unsettled him. Now it was simply the lane announcing itself, the same word spoken gently every time. Little Hayne was smaller than Mossfield by a clear measure. A handful of houses, a converted barn with new windows and a car on the gravel, a triangle of grass at the center with an old wooden bench and an apple tree that leaned slightly in the direction of the prevailing wind. The stop was at the far end of the main street, beneath a street light that flickered in a pattern Arthur had memorized without intending to. 3 flickers, a pause, then 1. 3 flickers, a pause, then 1. He had reported it 4 times over the years, and it had never been repaired. He had eventually stopped reporting it and simply noted it, the way you note a thing that belongs to the landscape, that has become part of what a place is. He pulled in beneath the flickering light, opened the doors, and someone was there. A shape at the edge of the shelter, turning toward the bus. A figure stepping forward into the light. A woman, perhaps in her mid-40s, wearing a dark coat buttoned all the way to the collar and carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder. She walked toward the open doors with the unhurried confidence of someone who had caught buses before, who knew the bus would wait for her, who felt no need to rush. Arthur had no memory of her face. He was quite sure he had not seen her on this route before. She climbed the steps, touched her card to the reader. The machine gave its single beep. Green light. Evening, Arthur said. The word came out sounding entirely ordinary, as if passengers boarded every night. Evening, she said, and moved past him down the aisle. She chose a seat 3 rows back, on the left, by the window. Arthur watched in the rearview mirror as she settled herself, resting the canvas bag on her lap, turning to look out at the passing dark. She did not take out a phone. She did not reach into her bag for anything. She simply sat in the amber light, with her coat buttoned and her hands resting over the bag, watching the night beyond the glass. Arthur pulled away from the stop. He found he was more conscious of his driving than usual. Not nervous exactly. Present was the better word. The way you became more aware of how you moved when you understood that someone was watching, not with any anxiety, but with a different quality of attention. He held the wheel with the usual ease and let the accumulated memory of 11 years carry him, but underneath that ease, something in him was simply more awake than it had been on the outbound leg. The lane shushed at the wing mirrors, past the apple tree, back through the narrow way. He checked the rear view more often than he needed to, not to watch her particularly, just to confirm she was there. The amber light laid itself across her quietly, and she kept her face turned to the window, and the dark fields moved past beyond the glass, and the engine hummed its steady low note, and everything continued. He passed back through Mossfield without stopping. The request bell had not rung. "Do you always drive this route?" she asked, after a while. Her voice was unhurried, a voice that matched the hour. 11 years, Arthur said. The same route every time? Wednesday through Saturday. 5 runs a night. A pause. The road ran between the fields, and somewhere to the right, behind a low rise, there was a reservoir that Arthur had known about for years without ever seeing. He could feel it there in the darkness, a body of still water behind the land, holding the night sky on its surface. "You must know every inch of it," she said. "I know every pothole," he said. "There's one at the bottom of the dip before the railway bridge. Been there about 6 years. They filled it twice. It came back both times." He heard something from behind him. Not quite a laugh. Something quieter than a laugh, but belonging to the same family. "Is it usually this quiet?" she asked. "On the bus." "Usually," he said. "Yes." He did not feel the need to explain further, and she did not press. The comfortable absence of explanation settled between them like something that had been agreed on without words. The heater ticked somewhere beneath his feet, the soft, irregular ticking it always made in winter, the bus warming itself from the floor up. The amber light held steady overhead. The road continued. The road between Mossfield and Pelton ran through a stretch with no houses visible, just the fields and the dark above them. On clear nights, the sky out here had a different quality than the sky above the town. More depth to it. More room for the stars to be themselves without competition. Tonight there was cloud cover and no stars at all, but Arthur knew them in their approximate positions anyway. That knowledge had settled into him without any deliberate effort. 11 years of the same route, the same stretch of open sky, some awareness of what lived above it building quietly over time. "I used to catch night buses in the city," she said, after a few more minutes. "When I was in my 20s and didn't have a car, there was always someone on the upper deck playing music from their phone, or a group of people being loud on the way home from somewhere. You were always half awake in case something needed your attention." "It's not like that here," Arthur said. "No," she said. "I can tell." Something in those words settled into him pleasantly. He was not sure why it should matter, having a witness to the quality of the route. He had known the quality for 11 years without needing it confirmed. But there was something in the confirmation that felt like a gift, small and unasked for. Pelton came into view ahead, the largest of the 3 villages on the route. A proper high street, a working pub with its sign still lit, a row of newer houses at the edge of the village that had appeared around 5 years ago. The old cottage hospital building was still there, converted now into apartments, its windows softly lit from within in a way that was different from when it had been a hospital. Warmer, more private. He pulled in at the stop outside the old hospital, opened the doors. The night air came in again, carrying something damp, the suggestion of a frost later. She did not move. He waited the 20 seconds, closed the doors and pulled away. The road from Pelton to Aldermoor was the longest unbroken stretch on the route, climbing steadily as it went, the land rising toward the rougher country at the edge of the county. The fields gave way gradually to ground that was less tended, bracken at the verges, occasional low stone walls running across the hillside in lines that followed some old calculation Arthur had never thought to look up. He had always simply accepted them. The walls were there because something had needed them to be. The engine note changed slightly on the climb. A working note. The bus settling into the effort of the gradient the way a person settles into a long walk uphill, not fighting it, just leaning into it and going. "Long way yet to Aldermoor?" she asked. 20 minutes or so, Arthur said. "We're climbing. Road levels off before the village." "I grew up near Aldermoor," she said. "Half a mile past the turning circle, up the farm track on the right." He glanced in the rear view. She was still looking out of the window at the dark. The bracken appeared at the edges of the headlight wash, pale and dry. "I haven't been back at night in a long time," she said. "I wanted to see it." Arthur did not find this strange. There were places that required a particular hour. The route had taught him this. The dip under the railway bridge was one such place, the long field stretch with the ash trees, the turning circle at Aldermoor, lit by its single street light with the wind moving over the high ground above it. None of those places were the same in daylight. They had a daytime version and a night version, and the night version was the one he knew. "There's a tree," he said, "about a mile back, just past the second bend after the bridge. It lost a major limb in a storm, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Grows sideways now on that side, reaches left." "I think I know the one," she said. "I notice it every run," Arthur said. "I don't know why exactly. It's just a tree." A pause. "Some things are like that," she said. He agreed, though he did not say so aloud. The road climbed. The bracken thickened at the verges. A wooden signpost leaned at the junction with a farm track, pointing off to the left at the same angle it had held for years. Arthur had long since stopped expecting anyone to straighten it. It had become part of the route now, a landmark as reliable as the railway bridge. He asked her name somewhere in the last few miles, a brief exchange that happened as naturally as if they had been talking all evening. "Wren," she said. He told her his. She repeated it once, quietly, the way people did when they were placing a name in memory rather than just acknowledging it. Wren. A small word. A small brown bird that was louder than it looked, that could fill a hedge with sound despite its size. He had always thought it was a good name. It fit the idea of a person who sat quietly and watched the world from a bus window at midnight without feeling any need to explain herself. She had moved back, she said, not permanently, just for a time. There were things at the family home that needed attending to. She had not said more, and he had not asked. The lights of Aldermoor appeared through the windscreen. A cluster of older stone buildings, a chapel with dark windows, a red telephone box on the corner that somehow still stood. The road narrowed to a single lane and then ended at the turning circle, a wide flat space of tarmac at the point where the village gave out and the rough land began. A single streetlight stood at the edge of the circle. The light it cast was yellowish and fell across the tarmac in an uneven oval. Arthur completed the turn and pulled the bus to a stop facing back the way they had come. He left the engine running. He always left the engine running during the rest stop. The warmth from the idling engine came up through the floor as it always did, a steady background warmth, the bus breathing quietly around them. In the rearview mirror, Wren was still in her seat. "This is Aldermoor," he said. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to ride to the end of it, from town, in the dark." A pause. I don't know how to explain it better than that. You don't need to, Arthur said. He allowed the 12-minute rest stop to pass in full. There was no schedule that required him to leave earlier, and leaving earlier had never occurred to him in 11 years of making this turn. The rest stop was part of the route. It belonged to Aldermoor the way the streetlight belonged to it, the way the telephone box belonged. Wren looked out of the window at the turning circle and the road beyond it and the dark above the village. Arthur sat at the wheel and listened to the engine. From somewhere up on the high ground above them, a wind moved across the bracken. He could not see the bracken from here, but he could hear the wind, a low and steady sound, not urgent, more like the breath of something very large that had been breathing for a long time and was in no hurry. He had sat in this turning circle many times, a number that was somewhere in the hundreds, across 11 years, 5 nights a week, 5 runs a night. He had always sat here with the bus to himself. This was different. Not loudly different, not dramatically different, just different in the way that the same room is different when there is a person sitting quietly in the corner of it. He thought about all the drivers who must have made this same turn before him. The route was old enough to have had many. Each of them would have known this circle in their own way, would have had their own name for the feeling of arriving here in the small hours and sitting with the engine running in the high ground above them. Perhaps some of them had not thought about it at all. Perhaps others had thought about nothing else. He was somewhere in between. He thought about it often enough to know it mattered, not often enough to feel he had understood it fully. The amber light held steady overhead. The engine hummed. When the 12 minutes had passed, he pulled out of the circle and started back. Wren stayed on the bus. She did not explain this, and he did not ask. She watched the dark out of the window as the road descended, the bracken giving way to fields, the fields settling into their familiar flatness on either side. Pelton, the old hospital building. He opened the doors, waited, closed them. She did not move. In the mirror, her eyes were sometimes closed and sometimes open. When they were open, she was watching the dark beyond the glass with a steady and unhurried attention. When they were closed, she was not quite asleep, but somewhere close to it, somewhere in the soft country between waking and not. He knew that country well from 11 years of late-night driving. The way the road loosened its hold on you after a certain point and let you drift without letting you go entirely. The dip under the railway bridge, the brief compression of the bridge itself, the change in sound, the engine note shifting, and then the release on the other side, and the fields returning, and everything resuming its usual dimensions. He breathed the way he always breathed after the bridge. He had stopped wondering why. The ash trees in the dark to the left, invisible now but present. The asymmetric oak, its good arm reaching in one direction and its damaged arm reaching only in the other. Arthur noticed it the way he always noticed it. Still there. still reaching. The lane into Mossfield, the hedges shushing at the wing mirrors. He slowed slightly on the narrowest stretch, not because the route required it, but because it felt right at this hour, with the bus carrying someone. There was a difference in how a vehicle moved when it held a person, a different kind of care. The village green, the bench, the pub now dark, its car park emptied. The flickering streetlight at the post office stopped doing its 3-in-1. It's 3-in-1. He opened the doors. A cat crossed the road just ahead of the bus, a gray one, moving through the headlights with the total indifference cats brought to headlights. It disappeared into the hedge on the far side without looking back. He closed the doors and moved on. In the mirror, Wren's eyes were closed. The canvas bag was still on her lap, her arms resting across it. Her head had tilted very slightly toward the window, and the amber light lay across her face in the same way it lay across everything in the bus, without preference, without urgency. Arthur drove. The road opened out past Mossfield, straightening toward the retail park. The distant orange smear of the town's light collected itself on the horizon, faint at first and then growing. The accumulated glow of the streetlights and the petrol stations and the places that stayed open for the people who worked at night. He knew that edge of brightness the way he knew the silver green of the hedge and the main beams. It was the color of almost home. The retail park. The big sheds dark. The lorry still in the car park, its cab light still on. The driver perhaps asleep in there with a blanket and a quiet radio. Arthur opened the doors, closed them. Behind him, Wren stirred. He heard the canvas bag shift, heard her breathe differently, the particular breath of someone coming back from somewhere close to sleep. "Are we back?" she asked. The voice of someone still half in the drift. "Nearly," Arthur said. "Town stop in a few minutes, then the depot." "I'll get off at the town stop," she said. He nodded without looking back. The road widened and the first terraced houses appeared at the edges, the streetlights becoming regular, the world becoming the world that operated in the daytime. He passed the canal, the kebab place on Market Street, the traffic lights on amber, blinking at the empty crossing. He pulled in at the stop. Wren came down the aisle slowly, the canvas bag over her shoulder, and stopped at the front of the bus, one hand on the pole beside the doors. The town stop was lit brightly out there, the ordinary brightness of a place built for busyness, and it felt abrupt after the amber quiet of the route. "Thank you," she said. "All part of it," Arthur said. Then, because that had come out more automatic than he intended, he added, "It was good to have someone on the bus." She looked at him for a moment. Something passed across her face, not a full expression, the trace of one. "I might come back," she said. "Some night. Wednesday through Saturday," Arthur said. Last departure is 9:47. She nodded once. Stepped down. The doors closed behind her. He watched in the wing mirror as she walked away along Market Street, coat buttoned, bag on her shoulder, at the same unhurried pace she had boarded with. At the end of the block, she turned a corner and was gone. Arthur sat with the engine idling. Then he pulled out and drove the last half mile to the depot. Bay 7. His bay, the one that had been his since 2018, when the driver who had held it before him had moved on to a different route and left it available. He pulled in, cut the engine. The bus gave a single soft shudder and went still. The amber lights faded. The depot's overhead fluorescence came in through the windscreen, cold and flat and indifferent. He sat for a moment. He always sat for a moment after the last run, a habit so ingrained now that he no longer thought of it as a habit. The transition from the bus's world to the depot's world was a short distance and a larger shift, and the breath between them helped. Tonight he sat longer than usual. The route had been the same route, the same road, the same stops, the same hedgerows and bridges and fields, the asymmetric oak, the leaning signpost, the reservoir behind its hill, unseen, everything in its place. And yet the run felt different from every other run. He thought about what Wren had said at the turning circle, about wanting to see Aldermoor at night from the bus, without quite knowing why. He had understood it completely, without having to translate it for himself. There were places that needed to be approached in a certain way to give up their best version. The turning circle at Aldermoor was one of those places. He knew its truest form, the one that existed at midnight, in the amber warmth of the idling bus, with wind coming across the bracken from the high ground. She had seen it now, too. That felt like something, though he could not have said precisely what. He climbed out of the bus. The depot smelled of diesel and cold concrete, and the particular chemical sharpness of oil on a stone floor. His footsteps sounded briefly against the walls as he crossed to the door of the staff room. Through the small window he could see the kettle on the counter, and the row of mugs on the shelf above it, and the notice board thick with its layers of paper, and the plastic chair that had sat at a slight angle for 2 years because one leg was fractionally shorter than the others. He pushed through the door, warm inside, the particular warmth of a room that had been heated all evening and had settled into itself. He filled the kettle at the small sink and set it going and stood at the window that looked out over the depot yard. Bay 7. The bus sitting in the overhead light, large and quiet, the amber lights off now, just the shape of it resting in its bay, a dependable shape, a familiar one. He thought about Wednesday or Thursday. One of those nights, the bus would go out again, and perhaps someone would be waiting at the stop in Little Hayne beneath the flickering light. Or perhaps the stop would be empty as it usually was, and the doors would open into cool night air and close again on nothing, and the route would continue as it had always continued. Both outcomes felt fine. The kettle clicked off. He made his tea the way he had always made it, bag in the mug, 2 minutes by the clock on the wall, a small amount of milk. He carried it to the chair beside the window and sat, and the chair adjusted for its short leg as it always did, and he settled his weight the way he had learned to settle it, and it was fine. Outside the window, the depot lay still. Bay 3 with the bus that did the early morning market run. Bay 11 with the larger bus, the one that served the school route, sitting blue-gray under the lights, all of them resting. All of them holding their routes in whatever way a bus held such things, in the accumulated memory of the roads they had run, the stops they had made, the people they had carried through the dark. Arthur drank his tea slowly. The mug was warm in both hands. The staff room was quiet. The fluorescent light above him hummed at the very edge of what could be heard. He thought about the sound the wind had made above the turning circle, the low, steady sound of it crossing the bracken, the way the bus had idled and sent its warmth up through the floor while that sound came down from the high ground, and how those two things together, the warmth from below and the wind from above, had seemed to enclose the moment completely. He rinsed the mug at the sink, turned the kettle off at the wall, switched the staff room light off, and walked back through the depot to the car park door. The night air outside was cold and smelled of frost coming. His car sat in the corner of the car park, alone now, the windscreen carrying a faint mist that had gathered while he was inside. He scraped the windscreen slowly. There was no hurry. The town was asleep. The roads between here and home would be empty. He drove home the way he always drove home, right on Bridge Street, left past the church with its lit porch, down the hill to the road that ran along the water, a traffic light on amber, blinking at no one, a fox crossing the road near the canal with its slow, particular gait, its eyes catching his headlights for a moment and then moving on. The house was dark when he arrived. His wife would be well into sleep by now. He had learned to move through the house at this hour without waking her, a skill so thoroughly practiced over 11 years that it required nothing from him, no deliberate attention, just the body knowing what the body knew. He let himself in, set his keys on the hook by the door. The house smelled of the evening meal and the warm, settled smell of a house that had been closed against the night. He hung his coat over the banister, moved through the dark hall to the kitchen. The kitchen was quiet. A small green light on the boiler, the shapes of things in the dark, all familiar, all in their usual places. He filled a glass of water at the tap and stood at the window. The back garden was in darkness. The apple tree was a shape against the sky. The fence was a line. He drank his water slowly. Then he rinsed the glass, left it on the draining board, moved through the hall, up the stairs. His wife breathed slowly in the dark of the bedroom. That sound, the particular rhythm of it, had been part of his nights for more years than he could easily count. It was a kind of company even now, a steady thing. He undressed in the dark, folded his trousers over the chair, slipped into bed. The sheets were cool on his side. He lay still. Outside, somewhere past the edge of town, a road was running through fields that lay in darkness. A pothole at the bottom of a dip, patient as ever. A reservoir behind a hill, holding the clouded sky on its still surface. An oak tree reaching in two directions, one of them more freely than the other. All of it out there, all of it continuing. He closed his eyes. The amber light of the bus was still faintly with him. The low hum of the engine, the way the warmth came up through the floor on a cold night and settled around you before you had noticed it arriving. A turning circle, a single light, wind across bracken, the route still out there, waiting for Wednesday, waiting quietly, the way roads wait, the way all steady things wait, without asking, without needing to be told.